Welcome to the IVF Abroad podcast for people who are struggling with infertility and trying to conceive, and who are facing more obstacles than options when it comes to having fertility testing or treatment in their home countries. Alongside other experts, I will share, educate and empower you on your journey and help you to learn more about going abroad for advanced fertility testing and treatments like IVF and egg donation. I'm Emma Haslam, your host, now mum of one, and the go-to expert in fertility treatment abroad. Since the birth of our son in 2018, I have made it my mission to make fertility treatment more informed, transparent, accessible, supported and affordable for more people. And I help people just like you to become unstuck, to find a best fit clinic that truly meets their needs, and to have fertility treatment on their terms and timescales so they can achieve their dreams of growing their families. And I'm here now to help you too. Be sure to check out the free resources in the show notes for more help after listening to today's episode. Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the IVF Abroad podcast. Today I am talking to Sean Greenaway, and we're going to be talking about all sorts of things, mainly centred around male factor infertility, donor conception, and Sean's story really about how he came to become a dad to his donor conceived twins, and really looking at how we work together to break the silence, because I think male factor infertility is a chronically underserved area, and Sean is doing lots of things to help people who are on a similar path. He is a male fertility advocate and co-founder of Nexus Fertility. And I'm not going to share too much more because I want him to be able to share his own story in a little bit that led him to becoming the proud dad that he is to his donor conceived twins. You might know him from Instagram. He's at Knackered Knackers, which is possibly the best Instagram name that I have ever seen. And he uses a lot of honesty and humour to help to break through the taboo, to help support others navigating similar paths. He's also got his own podcast that he co-hosts called the Male Fertility Podcast as well, and Nexus Fertility, which is a platform that transforms how men can access fertility support. So thank you so much, Sean, for being here with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I've met Sean at the fertility show, but we were so busy that we hardly got time to actually chat. But I've been following Sean online for a long time. And if you've been listening to my podcast for a long time, you will know that I am a mum to a double donor conceived little boy. So I've really watched and admired the work that Sean's been doing in this area, both from a point of view of being a donor conception parent and, you know, having a husband who also had male factor infertility issues. So he's doing some really, really great things. And I thank you for opening up the floor for that, because certainly when my husband and I were going through this and we began our kind of journey with infertility, you know, going back, 8-9 years ago now, there was literally nothing, very little around on the female side. There weren't the big Instagram communities and things that we've got now, but certainly on the male factor side, there was literally nothing at all. So I really hope that this conversation today is going to be something of hope for people and people to see that there are resources out there and there are people like Sean that can help you if male factor infertility, donor conception is something that you are currently facing or struggling with. So thank you, Sean, for being brave enough to talk about this, because I know that for lots of people, this is a really difficult topic to talk about. But I think, you know, the more of us that speak up about things like this, the more it does break down those stigmas, and it leaves the door open for people to have more conversations around this and to normalise this other path to parenthood, and to make people just feel like they're not on their own. And, you know, I think male factor infertility is so much more common than we talk about, and so much more common than perhaps a lot of fertility clinics will lead us to believe, when a lot of the focus is put on a female, if you're in a heterosexual couple, for example. And also I think, and this is obviously a massive sweeping generalisation, but I think, and you'll tell me if this is any different, but men often stay silent. I know for my husband, it was very much like that. So I think these conversations are so important, which is why I really wanted you to come on. So I'm going to hand over and let you introduce yourself as well. I've got some questions for you, but I'd really like to start, I think, with taking the listeners through those early stages of discovery when you realised that perhaps things weren't happening as you expected them to be, and your sort of story from that point of trying to conceive and it not happening to like the diagnosis and how that felt at that time, and then we'll work through to kind of where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks for your kind words and your introduction there. But like you said, I am now a male fertility advocate and a donor conception advocate, but my proudest title is husband and father, and it always will be. I'm a very proud father via sperm donation, and I wouldn't, the headline is I simply wouldn't change a thing, but we'll come on to that. So like you said, our journey also started around 8 years ago, 2017, and like you mentioned, there was nothing, like not even, there were some female accounts and communities, but in terms of men, there was just nothing, and it was a lonely place to be, and it was one that I never assumed that I would find myself in, because like many, especially of my generation, I'm a millennial, which
Same.
without going into specifics, it ages me a bit. It's the school education, that the sex ed was all about how not to get pregnant, and
Yep.
practicing putting condoms on bananas. Although I'm sure, and I've covered this with Kieran, I'm sure we used cucumbers, but whether that was just my school overcompensating. But it's it was, we were brought up with this belief that if we were to get naked near a girl, there was a risk. Even just getting naked in and around them, there was a risk of getting pregnant.
Yeah,
And
same.
so then we were petrified of it. And I remember those early encounters, really being so careful. And then when it comes to it, and you go through life and you have those experiences, and then I met my wife, and as we did, and as like every couple will do, you kind of sound each other out when you're dating, and you're seeing if your values and aspirations for life align, and you have those early conversations. And one of them was whether we wanted children, and we both very much did. And obviously all those other boxes got ticked as well. And so we got together and stayed together, but we knew that we weren't in a rush. And it wasn't until 8 years down the line, after getting together, by which time we'd been married for 4 years, that we started to try and grow our family. We at first, we were enjoying being a couple, and traveling the world a bit together and just having fun. And then we started making moves to just settle down a bit. We got married, we got a slightly bigger home, rather than like moved out of town centre and got a terrace house with a bigger garden and an estate car. We're putting all these situations and things in place to then, right, okay, what's next now? We'll just have the children, right? Easy. And we were to find out that it wasn't that easy. And the months rolled on. And each time my wife's period would come on, it weighed heavier and heavier each time. And so towards the end of 2017, so we started trying at the beginning of 2017, and there's so many, I don't know, like things that you just believe because someone might have told you. Like one of them for us was that, the contraceptive pill can take a few months to get out of your system, so just enjoy yourself for a bit. Don't put any pressure on yourself. So we thought, I got kind of 3 months in the bank, and then after that, it's where we'll really start trying in earnest. But those months just kept rolling on, and the pressure mounts, and especially from on the man's perspective, because there's a very obvious sign if that pressure's getting to us. Like, firstly, if you can't get it up, for want of a better phrase, or you can't finish, it's because it does have an impact, and the sex starts becoming less enjoyable and more functional and more timed. And I remember once I was at work, walking along with a colleague, and my wife phoned me and said, where are you now? I was like, I don't know what she was expecting me to answer. I said, I'm at work. I'm at work. She was like, how quickly can you get home? It's because she had just done an ovulation test and was like, okay, well, just get home as soon as you can. And even though I don't think my colleague could probably hear her voice coming through the phone because we were outside as well, but he knew just from what I was saying. And he went, trying, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And because he goes, yeah, he had 3 kids, but he knew that conversation of like, right, just get home when you can type thing. Because of that, right, you are required. We here. And so like we laughed about it as you do, but what he didn't know was that pain that was behind all those months that had gone past. And that month, that time, that try, like many before it, was again unsuccessful. So we went to the doctors at the end of the year and we were both referred for tests, which is actually not as common as it should be.
Not now either, is it?
No, it's usually, like stereotypically, the woman has been seen to be more of the problem, and they might be referred for tests, and the bloke just kind of like, right, carry on, because the assumption, even from medical professionals, and like I'm certainly talking, more ground level GP, of the assumption that male fertility isn't really a big factor. It doesn't decline, but all things that we know, certainly people who have probably been involved with the podcast know that actually that isn't the case. Sperm rates are declining and male fertility does decline as the years go on. But when you see Rolling Stones or Robert De Niro having babies in their 70s, it doesn't help that.
No.
But we were both referred for tests. My wife's all came back fine. I went for my first ever semen analysis, which is an experience in itself. But then came the phone call in January 18. Again, as many people who are trying, I was at work. The average age these days is at some point in your 30s. And that is a large proportion of the workforce. So that's where it has such a big presence throughout all those months and years of trying to conceive and fertility treatment, because so much of our waking time is spent there. So I took the phone call outside and I was told that I need to book another test in 3 months' time. And I said, oh, all right, why's that? And the person on the phone, I believe, is probably a member of admin staff and GPs. They said, I don't know, I've been asked to call you and ask to book another one in 3 months. It says here that you've got Azoospermia, but she had clearly not proofread the letter. She'd clearly not seen that word before and stumbled over it. She said, she's kind of Azoospermia, and ended with that intonation of a question to me. And I was like, well, what's that? And she said, I don't know. So I said, okay, fine. Booked the next test for March and got off the phone, got straight onto Google, obviously.
Yep.
Azoospermia, 0 sperm in the ejaculate. And I was like, just my world got flipped on its head at that moment. I was sat on a concrete block outside my office and I just read this thing, I'd just been told this word. I still didn't know how to pronounce at the time because the only time I'd heard it delivered was stumbled over. And it was a word that I'd never heard before, but one that came to define my whole life, essentially, and has done ever since. We'll come on to it, but now I choose to define that in a very different way as to what it was at that moment. But I phoned my wife and told her, and obviously I was in shock, she was in shock, and she said, well, I'll see you at home, let's go home. And I said, no, it's fine, I'll go back into work and I'll see you this evening. And that I'd say summarizes the next 18 months of the story, because I was in shock and going through trauma and denial and that grief as well, but was just trying to carry on as normal, going within myself and further in a hole. That second test in March of 18 confirmed the result. And then I've described it a few times as kind of the best analogy I can think of. It's like being at that point with that diagnosis, it was like being pushed into a river, and that river can be at times like rapids, fast flowing, dragging me under. I'll be trying to gasp for air and try not to drown. And there are other times where it all just slows down and it's like the doldrums and there's no progression. You're not moving on.
Mm.
And that was essentially like the whole rest of 2018, really, because we were trying to navigate all those early appointments, investigations, IVF funding applications for the NHS, and there was not a lot happening for the rest of that year. And now, towards the end of that year, it was then 2 years since we started trying, and it was just a desperate and painful time.
And I think the fact that, somebody calls you who sounds like they weren't medically trained, but probably should have been, ringing and delivering that result to somebody. And yes, while they might think, well, we've asked you to come back for another test, we're not saying definitively it's this, to kind of deliver a word to somebody who, of course, is going to go away and get onto Google, without any context, without anything, is truly devastating. And that should not happen, should it?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it would necessarily felt any different had somebody medically trained come on and had a conversation with you about it. But I always think at least you would have had the opportunity to ask questions and just get a bit more context. Whereas we go down a Google rabbit hole, don't we? And then we're just left on our own with this to try and cope with. And like you just said, I mean, I'm nodding away listening to you. Everything that you're saying really, really resonates with me. And I'm sure if my husband Adam was here as well and thinking about some of the things that he would say, would resonate with him as well. We were delivered devastating news and then just kind of left to go off and figure things out ourselves. And it's so hard. There's such a lack of support and understanding about the impact that this has on us. Because, I mean, I'm presuming, Sean, from what you've just said, that it must have been a really emotional time for you personally and as a couple. It must have, I mean, for us, it definitely impacted us as a couple, but a lot of pressure on from the whole trying to conceive side of things. And then when we found out actually that, our chances were like less than 5%, the effect it had on our confidence, our identity. My husband would probably say like his sense of masculinity, even my sense of what, I thought my body should do as a female. But how would you say that diagnosis, when she's had it kind of confirmed the second time, how would you say it affected you personally? And then did it have an impact on your relationship as a couple as well?
Yeah, all of the above. And to come back to the first point about the way in which it was delivered, this was 7 years ago, almost 8 now, beginning of 18, but it's still happening now, unfortunately. I'm still talking to guys right now who have been misdiagnosed or had news delivered in a really poor way with no safeguarding around it as to the implications of delivering life-changing news over the phone. Or even if it's in person, there's just nothing. It's like delivery, mic drop. And these guys are then just out on a limb. And it's still happening, unfortunately. But yeah, it was... I didn't know at the time that I was grieving and I was being dragged through these feelings of, and not necessarily in a nice, neat order, but I was spent a lot of time being angry. I remember the blame, the denial, but it just kind of flip-flopped between them, and it's so messy and complicated. And the kind of overarching thing that happened was that I went within myself. I wasn't talking to my wife. We were talking about the practical things, like the appointments, what's next, what do we need to do, but emotionally, I was just unavailable. And that was because, like you mentioned, like what Adam went through, my identity as a man was being stripped. I didn't know who I was anymore. I had also, again, I mentioned, being a millennial, I grew up in the Lads Mag era, but pre-internet, but Lads Mag, and your masculinity is your virility, or the front cover, or whoever Men's Health or whatever, is always these guys that are ripped, and then within it, it's like within the Lads Mag, it's all what you should be and what you should be attracting as a man. All the articles would always be like how to attract more women, etc., etc. So suddenly, when I can't procreate, my virility is zero. What does that make me as a man? That's what I was having to unpack, and it was a long process. And I mentioned that there was no one else about talking about it. It wasn't like I was looking at first. There was so much shame and embarrassment and feelings of failure that I did just completely shut off, and I stopped being who I was because that was being attacked. Who I thought I was, and like kind of being one of the lads, being the last in the pub, and all this, like being heavily involved in sports and just being very social. I was like, well, that's all what I thought a man should be, but I've had this other element of the kind of hidden element completely stripped away. So what does that make me? I didn't know where my place was anymore. So all the things that would previously bring me joy, I was withdrawing from as well, like socially, and then like I mentioned, it's like that 18-month period almost where I got the diagnosis and I was just going through this. And there were times where, as I mentioned, work was a big part of this because you're there all the time. There were times where I was like completely absent, like as in like mentally. Presenteeism, I think it's called. I'd be there in body, but not in mind or spirit. But there were times where I was like throwing myself into it and was overworking because it was an escape. But they didn't know anything that was going on because I was hiding all these appointments and phone calls and taking time off or going sick or trying to change work shifts around. And where the shift started to happen was when I had to tell work what was going on towards the spring of 2019, because I was offered a varicocele embolisation, a minor medical procedure, but after the investigation was going through, a varicocele was identified, which is a large cluster of veins which it overheats the testicles essentially, which need to be a bit cooler than body temperature and can damage any sperm that are being produced. So suddenly I've gone from hiding hour-long appointments here or there to suddenly needing an operation, which was a day outpatient operation, but then a few days to recover. Nothing, just no heavy lifting type thing. But there's not really any way that you can hide scrotal surgery on a sick form. So I had to tell them, and my line managers were both geezers, so to speak. I worked in London at the time. They were lads. They both had, between them, I think one had 4 kids, the other had 2. So, I emailed them. I didn't feel like I could tell them. And plus I thought if I went up to them and said, can we have a chat? Heads would turn in the office, etc. And I just didn't want that highlight. So I emailed them, and they were just so good.
Good.
They were like, I thought I'd be throwing myself to the wolves. The way they dealt with it and the empathy and compassion they showed me. And I remember one of them, and I said, when I referred to them as geezers, because one of them, that was his like most used word. He took me aside and was like, geese, your annual leave is for your holidays. Everything else is for me to take care of. Don't ever try and hide this again. And I think it probably made a lot of sense for them as to how I'd been over the last year or just over a year. And that was the kind of the start really to then opening up and sharing with more people. And it wasn't, it's not like a switch. It wasn't like, I'm talking months go by and the embolisation didn't have any impact. So then my next option was a micro-TESE, to have my testicles cut open to look for sperm directly, which was going to be the best part of 3 weeks off. And then it's like kind of I started talking to my colleague who I sat next to, a female. And then her first thing was, she said, and again, with anyone that I would share with, even close friends, I would always say, we are having a little bit of trouble conceiving. It was never me. Of course, like, you are doing it as a couple. My wife would never say this was me that was down to, but she was shouldering a lot of that for me to her friends when she was saying, we are struggling to conceive. Again, the assumption is that it's a female-based problem. And I remember opening up to my colleague, and she said, well, Martin, who was the guy who sat at the other side of her, so 2 away from me, and I was quite pally with him as well. She said, Martin and his wife went through this. She said, seriously, what do you guys talk about? I was like, well, not this. So that then when I was 8, then I started talking to him. He and his wife had unexplained fertility, which I don't know if you've covered it, but it has its own frustrations and
Yeah.
unexplained, or is it just uninvestigated?
Yeah.
Probably a different topic for a whole episode, I think. But then by talking to him and realizing that a lot of the feelings and things that he went through are similar to what I was, even though he didn't strictly have male factor, but he's still in it. And that's what we say to guys that I speak to now is, doesn't matter where it lies, you're still in it as a bloke, and you still go through a lot of the same thinking and feelings. And then I started looking for support, like really tailored support, male factor, infertility stuff. Yeah, and that's when I realized there was just nothing. So, and that actually set me back a lot. That put me back in the hole for a bit, because I'll talk to Martin, who, as I said, like kind of unexplained on both their sides, but not defined male factor. And so then I'm looking for other groups or other people talk about it's nothing. So I'm like, well, it must just be me then. And it was isolating. It set me back. It put me back in that kind of shame phase. And there are, again, I say about the commonalities, but then because Martin didn't have to have his balls cut open, so I wanted to speak to other people who had a micro-TESE, but I couldn't find it. And it's daunting. I didn't want to have this operation. I'd actually said to my wife that we like, let's look at alternate routes to parenthood before that. And obviously this is like a summary of a lot of conversations that were going on, but I just really didn't want to have that op. And in the end, she was the one who said, what would you regret less? Having it and having potential implications from that operation, because there are risks with any major operation, of course. Or would you regret not having it and always having that question mark? And I thought it was a really good way of framing it, completely left up to me, which is fine. And I realized that, that it would be good to get full closure and go for it, even if it was negative. Because I kind of forgot to mention, but after the embolisation, which was in March of 2019, I then had to wait 3 months for the sperm cycle to regenerate again.
Yeah.
Go for another semen analysis. I was convinced that was going to work. I was only given about a 30% chance of it having an impact or effect. But I'm an optimist. That 30%, I was like, that's awesome. I'll take those odds all day long. And had to wait the 3 months. And it was still it. I had still 0 sperm after, and that was my most crushing point at that then. And then by the time I had the micro-TESE in August of 2019, the results were delivered immediately after, because they opened me up. I was under general, but then when I woke up, the urologist and the nurse was stood right there, right then, and gave me the results. And weirdly, it wasn't my lowest point, because I think I'd kind of been moving along through the process by that point. And even though I had a higher percentage of that yielding any results than I did the embolisation, I was more pessimistic about the outcome of that.
I think, though, as we move along, our hope diminishes, though, doesn't it? Do you think? And I think sometimes, like I'm like you, I'm an optimist as well, and they hear 30%, and I think, ooh. But I think the more things happen to us, the more that just gets that optimism, because we are humans, gets crushed. I mean, you've mentioned how through that time, opening up to work for you was a positive experience, which I'm really pleased about. And that you looked for community support and it didn't exist, similar to myself and my husband. What do you think helped you cope during that time? So you've mentioned work. It sounds like work was a coping mechanism, be that through overworking, having that consistency, and perhaps opening up to the geezers who were actually really nice about things, and also, some of your colleagues like Martin. What else or who else helped you cope during that time?
Me. I think what that did, I didn't go into detail with them. It was very top level. I think, even from memory, I think even with Marty, even it was never, I didn't really go into the specifics that it was male factor. It was that we are.
Yeah, we are.
So, but what that did was, I was like a pressure cooker. And probably ready to explode, but that released a valve, allowed me to have a bit of clarity. And what actually happened, because I'd been doing a lot of soul searching by this point, which, since we started trying 2.5 years down the line, but since the diagnosis, about 1.5 years, going through that identity crisis, really stripping back to who I was, because I'd lost who I was. So I was having to ask myself difficult questions. I didn't have the answers for those questions about who I was. So I'd ask my wife, and her answers were great. And then because often who goes through life asking themselves, well, who am I? But often the person closest to us, or especially our significant other who's chosen to hopefully stay with you for the rest of your life, has a better perception and idea of who you are, because they see it from the outside in. And she was able to give me a better foundation of who I was, and then I could start building on that. And what it really was that got me out of this hole was I started reforming. I think some of the phrases are like self-improvement or personal development. I started going through that and really starting to, with a really concrete grasp of who I was, and then started trying to go, okay, well, if I can't be what I assumed a man should be, I'm going to reframe and rebuild who I want to be as a man. And my previous commute, I would just, on the way in, read the newspaper, on the way home, probably fall asleep or listen to music. Suddenly I was listening to really powerful stories, like Henry Fraser, who was paralyzed from the neck down. His book literally changed my life. Listening to podcasts and just really started to reform and getting a new sense of inner strength. And that then laid the foundations to really starting to progress by opening up and speaking to friends and wider family and stuff like that. And then everything really started accelerating once I started opening up. And part of the reason I stayed so inward was because even my close friends, who I'm very blessed to have, I've got a core group of 5 of us lads, and we've known each other since we were 5. And very close. We still speak certainly weekly, if not with a couple of them daily almost. But they all had kids easily, naturally, first time, or all the jokes that come with that. I didn't even get to enjoy it, just because it just happened first time. And so I didn't think that they would get it, and they probably never could really understand the intricacies but they were so amazing that I realized that I'd just been robbing them of that chance to be the good friends I needed. And I do take full credit for this, and I have told them, but it's leveled up our friendship as a group. We've got more depths now, more levels. We share more openly about everything because I was the first to make myself vulnerable. And that was received and rewarded with their care and compassion back. And I say that to guys, don't underestimate your mates, because you might think this, because we're all putting on this top level of who we are, but actually we've all got more depths and levels. And if they haven't, and if you tell your friends and they don't receive it well, then they don't deserve to be in your life anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of how it affected your relationship as a couple, and I imagine there'll be perhaps some positive ways in which it impacted you as a couple, but there might also have been some challenges as well. Are you happy to share some of those? Because I think that would be helpful for people to hear.
Yeah, I think the headline is that we became stronger. Our mantra used to be that this was given to us as a challenge because we were strong enough as a couple to deal with it. And we would literally name friendship couples, and we would say it would break them. It would break them. And whether that's nice or not, but you do what you need to do at the time. And we knew it would, because they were kind of built on shakier foundations. And we would say, we're taking this on behalf of our friends. And I did say that to my to my mates when I told them, because there are 5 others, so one of 6, and I said, the stats are 1 in 6 couples, so you're welcome, lads. I'll take this bullet. And so yeah, but it wasn't always like, oh yeah, we've got this, we're in it together. Because I went inwards and I wasn't communicating, and I know that it was very hard on my wife. And like I said, she was shouldering it for both of us, because I wasn't opening up to anyone. And she tried desperately to push me to open up, to share, to seek help, because she knew it would work. But then she soon realised that by pushing me, it was pushing me further in within myself. And so she learned to take a foot off the gas with that, gentle prompts. But I'll tell you what, really, and like I said, it's not like we weren't communicating, but it was more practical. And because our home started sometimes I feel like a bit of a prison, because it's where we would retreat to after a fertility appointment or another adverse test, or that's where you'd be when you get your phone calls or whatever, or go back to certainly after work. So one thing that really helped us was when lockdown kicked in, because we're still, obviously fast forwarding to March 2020 now, but we still we're trying through treatment by this point. But those walks, getting out of the house and actually not facing each other on the sofas or across the kitchen table like an intimidating interview almost.
Yeah.
We were walking side by side, shoulder to shoulder in the same there was something about it. I think that there is now kind of walking, talking therapy groups and stuff.
Yeah.
And I know it literally is pun intended. We stumbled across it. I stumbled across it because it's not as intimidating. You're not looking at each other. You're out in nature, which I think there's probably a lot of research about that helps us get more in flow with ourselves anyway. We're a bit more attuned as a species to where we should be rather than living in concrete boxes. And I just started opening up, and that was where, because we still need, we still hadn't got pregnant by this point, and we were very much still in it. I was able to finally start airing out everything and exploring kind of, just everything that I'd done myself, but able to articulate it to outwardly, because it's hard to say something when you've only ever been thinking it in your head before.
Yeah. And do you think, certainly for me and Adam, we've both since said there was an element of each of us that was trying to do what we thought was protecting the other.
Mm.
So we almost felt like at times opening up was like burdening the other person when the other person's also going through it. So there was a lot of that, more so on Adam's side, you won't mind me saying that, of kind of keeping things to ourselves because you don't want to upset the other person. But actually, we realised as time went on, that was worse for us, and actually where we had conversations. And I completely resonate with you. When you're in a house, it can just feel a bit intense, can't it? But when you're outside and you're moving, spending some energy, you're not directly facing each other, it feels somehow different, doesn't it? And we had lots of walks as well where things would just naturally come up and it just feel less intense. But yeah, there were certainly parts of us where it was almost like we didn't want to burden the other person by talking about how we felt when they were already struggling. But actually, like I'd say to Adam, but I'm trying to read your mind with where you're at. I'd much rather you tell me where you're at than me guess and catastrophize and think X, Y, and Z, which might not be true. Yeah. And I remember them saying, well, because at first we thought it was a male factor infertility issue. And like your wife, I would never have said, this is Adam. It was like, we are struggling to conceive. And even if it had ended up being solely a male factor infertility issue, which it wasn't for us, it was both, I still consider that to be our shared thing. But I know for Adam, he, and I'm going to bring him on the podcast, actually, we were talking about this last night, but he said that when he thought it was him, he felt like it was very much him and it was his fault, which I would never think that, but that's how he felt. And he said he almost felt better when we had issues on both sides, because suddenly he didn't feel like he blamed himself as much anymore, which I think goes to show that how much guilt and blame we put on ourselves for something that we just literally cannot help. But, a lot of this has only come out since, now we're kind of through the other side of it. And I think, there is just a lot of that trying to protect the other person or doing what we think is protecting the other person when actually it's not necessarily the case. I've always found, actually, when I've been able to open up about anything, it's always better. It's hard to get the words out sometimes, isn't it? But then actually, generally speaking, it is always better than keeping things in our heads and, presuming what we think other people are thinking as well, like the mind reading that we can't actually do, even though we think we can.
Yeah, so right. It's so true. But that's the thing, and I had that kind of blame and the fault stuff running through my mind as well. And just when I aired that, and my wife was like, I've never once felt that. But because I think, as blokes, we do want to protect, and however that is, whether it's physically, psychologically, emotionally, we don't want to put someone else at harm if possible, especially not our closest loved one.
Yeah.
And when we are then also having that feeling of failure, and then like when it comes onto the IVF, for example, my wife had a needle phobia and was repeatedly fainting in the clinics when we were having blood tests, and it's like, oh, it's my fault, and like seeing someone faint. I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but she would make this weird guttural grunting noise and all seize up, and it was horrible to see.
Mm.
I was like, that's my fault. We wouldn't be having blood tests without me, and da da da. Like, it's really hard. It's hard to unpack, but the only way you can do that really is by that communication, which is very hard too. But you do it, and it's like a muscle. But the more you do it, the more you exercise it, the better you become at it, the stronger you become at it.
Yeah, 100%. So from kind of finding out your diagnosis and then moving to treatment, there obviously will have been a period of time in between, and the kind of deciding on maybe going down the donor conception route. So I'd love to understand a bit more about that decision-making process, whether that was hard for you, whether it wasn't hard for you, because for some people it's an easy decision, for other people it's much more nuanced than that. But how did you sort of first find out about that as an option? It might be that it came through a clinic, and what did that look like when you and is it Jenna? Is it your wife?
Yeah.
Yeah, first start talking about kind of using donor sperm as an option, and what your feelings were around that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually about how we first found out about it. I don't think I've ever been asked. You've done it. We said before, if you ever come up with a question that I haven't been asked before, and I think you've just done it. It's not particularly sensitive one, but you still managed it. But I can't remember
Thank
how
you.
that first came up as a question, but I assume it would have been probably delivered in an appointment about alternate parenthood. Um, so the first time that started coming up is because leading up until the varicocele embolisation, it was all roads were leading to let's just get this sorted. I'd never been in hospital for anything before. I'd never even been fortunate to never break a bone or anything. I'd never had a medical procedure. So I was convinced it was going to work, and there was no other outcome for me other than that. And then it didn't. And I was at the lowest I've ever been. That was my bottom. And there's from at the bottom, there's only one way up. But then part of that was then starting to realize, like I said about the micro-TESE, I was like kind of like, doing it for closure in the end, because I started thinking, well, what's next? What's the other options? And like you said, there was probably some sort of conversation or nugget put in our mind from the clinic. So yeah, we looked at adoption. We kind of, and then for us, like I've always been in and around fostering and adopting. My mum was a foster parent for nearly 30 years, so I kind of had very first-hand experience of seeing kids come into the family and then go away for adoption and what that entailed. But also, I really wanted to see my wife pregnant. She aced all of her fertility tests. The lucky bugger. It's not like, but I was like, you've got such good fertile health that there's why not give you that chance to carry a baby and experience that. And also, I wanted to experience it, even though it was becoming more obvious it might not be genetically related to me, any child. But I really knew I wanted to experience that. So then she said, well, why don't we do double donation, either sperm and egg or embryo? And so that I think her words were something like, so it's fair, so it's equal. I was like, again, you don't need to do that, because like her niece our niece, but on her side, people have always thought that she's my wife's daughter when like they spend a lot more time together when they're younger. And I don't think it's necessarily because they looked so similar, but I have always had a very strong bond with my niece. And I was like, Phoebe is basically a mini you. I was like, that, like, that could still happen. And that's what I still want that, because I love you. I want to the same reason that it wasn't just about me grieving the loss of my genetics. It was my wife also was grieving that because she loves me and she would have wanted to see like a mini me and etc. Because you settle down for someone and you marry them for life because that's part of what you would want, is to see that person you love so deeply almost replicated in some way. And
Yeah.
both of us having to let go of that. And I didn't want to let go of it for my wife as well. And so then I started looking like we realized that kind of all these little avenues we explored, it was all pointing towards sperm donation. And then it was like, well, can I do it? Can I really do this? So it was, for me, it was looking inward, looking at my own upbringing. My grandfather on my dad's side wasn't my biological grandfather, but he raised my dad and his brothers from when they were little. So he was in it like he was part of our family way before I was even a twinkle in my dad's eye, as they would say. So he was married to my nan before I was even born, etc. So he was the only thing that I ever knew as a grandfather, and he was everything a grandfather should be. And I knew, even though I didn't call him granddad, because no one everyone, my dad and my uncles all called him Philly. So I just naturally did. Everyone called him that, but it didn't matter. He was the perfect grandfather. And then I looked at my mum and dad, who were both divorced and remarried with step parents, and the love that I had for them. And then mostly what was the real thing, I mentioned Phoebe, my niece on my wife's side, the bond that we had. I was like, yeah, the genetics, the DNA link is really not important for love. Love is earned. Love is something that you can't just turn on and off, or you don't just get as a right because you are genetically related. It's something that has to be worked on every single day and built. And those bonds, yeah, they are not something that are the be all and end all due to biological link. And that was where my lessons were. And that was part of the main reason why I was like, do you know what? I don't need the micro-TESE. And then interestingly enough, being at that point prior to having it, but then having the negative micro-TESE, I did need to pause a bit because it was so final. It was literally, that door was slammed shut, and I just needed a bit more time. First of all, to physically recover because it was awful, but also just to be with myself and let that go, really let that go, and get to that point of acceptance, which I think is crucial for anyone. And this should be happening for anyone having children, even naturally and easily. You should be thinking, are we ready for this? Can I do it? All those questions that as a donor recipient parent has to go through. Everyone should be doing it. Of course people don't. But I had to just get over that final hurdle of acceptance because I knew it was going to be a complex route to parenthood. And it's not a one-time decision. It's something that comes up all the time. And I'm very much living that now.
And what would you say your initial feelings were about using a donor? Or, I mean, there might have been many feelings, and were there any fears or like misconceptions that you had to work through?
I think most of my decision-making process was through that, whether there would be a bond and love. And that was actually because of those experiences I was able to draw upon. That was a relatively quick situation. I know some guys really, really struggle with the thought of someone else's sperm being used and without being too vulgar, but inside their partner. Even though it's not like that, it's obviously very scientific and medical, but it's a psychological barrier. I didn't have that. And then it came down to, again, it's crucial, but having acceptance of what I was going through when it came to selecting a donor, not trying to replicate and recreate myself.
Yeah.
Because that would simply be impossible. And so it was, we kind of just went down the middle of both of us, because we wanted a child or children who would fit in with our family. We already knew that we'd be having a complex route to parenthood as it was. We didn't want to make it any more complicated than it needed to be. And then so that, kids would fit in our family and our wider family, and hopefully have similar interests and physical traits to us, and then let nurture do what it does, or try to.
Yeah, but I think nurture has a huge impact, doesn't it? I mean, that's
Oh,
scientifically proven, isn't it?
I know it'd be easy for us to sit here as donor recipient parents and overstate the role of nurture, and people would say almost like, "Oh yeah, but you have to say that because it's all you've got." And but like, I see it as a parent, and literally like even though my wife is genetically related to them, she has no more input on that nurture than I do, and it's so important. And it's just the biggest honor and privilege in the world to try to shape and mold these tiny human beings into being someone firstly healthy, but then just trying to make them into a good human and be full of love and gratitude. And it's a real honor. And it's every day you have to apply yourself fully. And yeah, I honestly, I did a criminology degree way back when. It kind of feels like a lifetime ago now. But I remember one whole subject covered was all about nature versus nurture.
Mm.
And you could, for example, when we were looking at donors, I think it's natural. First of all, you start looking for like educational attainments, or what they do for a job, or their sporting ability. But let's say you could even choose someone who's just any example. If you choose a professional sports person to be but unless you nurture that, it's never going to come out anyway. So in the end, we went for a completely blank canvas on the donor one. That obviously there's the mandatory information, the biometric data, the height, weight, build, eye color, etc., medical information. But we went for one that had no pen picture. We knew nothing about their character or anything like that. And we just thought, no, our children need to be who they are. And then our job as parents is to nurture them and open every door we can for them, and allow them to do that in their own way without expectation. And so it was that's what we chose.
No, I love that. I think that's important too. And would you say that the thought of using a donor in positive ways made you feel hope that perhaps you hadn't felt for such a long time? I say that because, and I'm not telling people how they should feel, but for us, after trying for so long and after it just being stuck in limbo and just facing all the things that we go through and not getting anywhere, for then somebody to say, hey, look, there's this other way that actually has got really high success rates compared to where we were. There's no guarantee, of course, but actually, with it being a numbers game, all of a sudden, Adam and I could be like, wow, do you know what? We think this is probably going to happen. And we had this hope that we had not had for years, that came with it, that I'm so grateful for, because that keeps you going when you feel hope. And it's not possible to feel hope all the time, is it? But because it's interestingly, it wasn't mentioned to us with the UK clinics we spoke to. It was mentioned to us when we started talking to clinics overseas. So I didn't really know anything about donation. And I've since learned loads since then. But I would say that my primary feeling, and Adam would say the same, was that we had this hope. Once we'd kind of dealt with the reality of where we were, and then it was like, you're then looking, right, okay, what are our next steps? We both felt this hope that we just not felt for such a long time. And is that something you guys felt? Did it make you feel more hopeful?
I think for us, there was always hope there. It might have sometimes been like a candlelight rather than a beam.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we always had it there, because you have to cling on to. It's like finger hold sometimes on a mountain. That's all you've got.
Yeah.
But until you get to your next major milestone or point, then you can really start building on that. But it was. But it gets stripped away. We made that decision towards the end of 2019 after I needed that. So I had the micro-TESE in August. I think by October I said, okay, I'm ready. Let's go, because it just took me to take a little bit extra to do it. But then we started doing the IVF, and we were all geared up to have egg retrieval and then the transfer. And if it had happened and to plan, and my wife had a fresh transfer, we would have had a 2-week wait and done the pregnancy test on Boxing Day. But she got ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So we had to just stop everything. She was very, very poorly. It was really serious. And it was like, yeah, you just have to stop. Well, how long for? Till she gets better. Don't know how long that will take. And that is when I mentioned my lowest point being after the failed embolisation. That was my wife's lowest point. And also because her belly was so swollen, she looked 6 months pregnant. And it was like what you so desperately wanted, but it was just stripped away. And I remember her being so down, very poorly and very down. And I felt so hopeless at that point. And that's where the hope did start to evaporate, thinking, is this ever going to happen? And like I said, it was still there. It must, like, the candle was flickering, and then kind of got through that. And I laugh because it's just ridiculous, but we were ready to go again, and we had all the drugs at home, and we were due to start. And then 2 days prior to us starting, lockdown kicked in, and it was just whipped away again. But we were actually okay with that because everyone was in it. It wasn't something personal to us. It wasn't our bodies letting us down again. The whole world was in it. And actually, for the first time, probably in our whole relationship, but also certainly since the IVF and struggling to conceive, we were really together. Rather than being like passing ships in the night, we had time to reconnect. We said, fine, everyone's in this. Let's just make the most out of it that we can. And we had fun. And I'm very, always very respectful and careful. I have friends who lost jobs. Obviously, I know of like kind of people who have lost loved ones. But for us, that time together was crucial. And it then meant that when we were able to, when Hancock announced that fertility clinics could reopen in May 2020, we were ready to go. She was in the right phase of her cycle, and we had all the drugs at home, started taking them, and then that was the one for us. It worked, thankfully, on our first frozen transfer, but it took 3 times to get there.
Oh, yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Like, you get the hope again, and then you hit another roadblock, and you're like, oh, for God's sake. And I think it just takes so much time and so much energy that, like I say, that hope cannot remain the whole time. I think the analogy of a flickering candle is great and very accurate.
Just don't let it go out. Just do
Yes.
anything you can to keep that candle going, even if it is doing that little crackly flicking. That's fine. It's still there.
Still there. And so now you are dad's 2 twins, right?
Yes. So we had 2 embryos transferred, and then we found out it was twins. And it's just been mad ever since. They were born in February 21, lockdown babies. So we had the IVF, that kind of and the transfer in lockdown. Came out of lockdown, went back into it when they were born, and I think there was even another one at some point as well. But, it's been intense, but everything that I hoped it would be. And they're 4.5 now, and this is I'm very conscious of making the most of every moment. And I think this is probably something that people who go through infertility know anyway, but because it's not just, I remember saying, when we get there, when we become parents, I'm going to enjoy every moment, every sleepless night. That's impossible. That goes out the window. But what I do center myself, ground myself on, is acknowledging that 2 things. Firstly, they do grow up very fast, which you don't realize until it's happening. But secondly, in terms of being a donor recipient father, this is the glory period. And I'm not saying, like, I just don't know. The future is unknown. But the teenage years, for example, could be hard. All those hormones, but we are telling early, we're telling often, even though they don't understand anything of it. But it's us getting used to the story. It's them being armored with that and knowing it's part of their story from the outset, and just trying to make it, like I said about Azoospermia defining me, I now define it as my strength, because it's changed who I am as a person. It's made me a stronger man, a better husband, a better father as a result than I would have been had we just got knocked up easily. And I want them to know that this is a strength, and we all are different. And IVF and donation, donor conception is becoming more common anyway, and it's to know that they're not outliers, they're not unnormal, and everyone goes through something, and this is what we've done, and it's never about putting pressure on them either, that they should be grateful because of what we went through. No, it's not about that at all. But I'm just hyper conscious all the time that this is easy at the moment. As hard as parenting 4-year-old twins is, it's very, it's not complex about the donation at this time. When that happens, I'm sure, because things will come up, of course, like whether they want to try and meet their biological father. I at this time, I don't think it'll change. I'll say I will support them in whatever they want. Whether they want me to help them, come with them, or take a completely hands-off approach, I'll respect that. But I don't think I'll change in that. But just anything, and those teenage rages where they say you're not my real dad, or it might not ever happen, but I'm trying mentally prepare myself that it could. I also kind of reconcile that by realizing that there are many, many hundreds of millions of angry teenagers throughout history who have shouted, "I wish you weren't my real father," to their biological dad. And so I know that sometimes things are said uncontrollable in like through rage. And what I hope is, if that does happen, that a cuddle is followed up at some point, not too long after, and an apology, and which might have to come from both sides, of course. I'm not saying it'll be from them, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think, again, I'm nodding, listen to everything you're saying, and, that's very much how we feel and think about it as well, knowing that teenagers come with challenges, whether you're a biological parent or not. And we've gone down the route of honest and open often as well. Again, understanding, he's only 7, so it's not the same understanding. This is potentially the easy bit. But I don't think, teenage years are often not easy for lots of people. And I'm very much in the camp of, or we are, like, supporting our son with whatever he needs support with, and having those open and honest discussions, knowing that it doesn't mean to say it's not all going to come round and come good. And, also, like, speaking about it so it's not this, like, taboo subject. And I read something, actually, that in every classroom in the UK, there will be at least one child from donation, which I think is very interesting, because there's not as much noise around that, because I think people don't necessarily speak up about it for lots of different reasons. But I thought, wow, that's so interesting. And also, we've got some same-sex friends who've got children where a donor's also being used. So, hopefully that shows him that there are others as well. But I think our main point at this point is, we refuse to really let infertility steal any more of our life away than it already did. And I agree, it's such a privilege to be parents to these children through this, this unique path to parenthood. And thank goodness that it was available, because like you, we wouldn't be parents today. And, parenting comes with challenges, I think, whether or not your children are biologically conceived or donor conceived. Different challenges, perhaps, but challenges. And we don't really know what those challenges are going to be. Equally, the children might be like, well, I don't really have much to ask about it, like we've always known, and that's like our normality. But, I kind of think no matter what, as long as you support your children, however they came to be, that's all we can do is love them and support them. And I refuse to spend any more time raking over what if, because a lot of the things that come up in life and blindside us are the things that we're not worrying about anyway. And I just want to enjoy this time. And when challenges come up, connected to donation or not, we will tackle and deal with those challenges and support our son like we would, even if he was biologically conceived. And I just refuse to give any more time or energy to that. And instead, I want to enjoy our son. And I think a lot of the fears and angst and worry that people can have, I know through my clients that have gone down the donor conception route, alleviates once they then have their children. I'm not saying that everything's rosy and they don't have any worries or concerns like you've just been talking about, but it can feel extremely heavy for lots of people when they're in the process of making the decision. But then actually, once your children are here, I think it does feel different. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely bang on. And I've said before, for anyone who has doubts, I wish that I could bottle the feeling that I have and just allow them to experience it, because honestly, like, I defy anyone who is biologically related to their children to say they love their kids more than I do. It's
Same.
just not. It's not possible. Like, it's literally.
No.
I'll give a quick example, because I'm very conscious that I've gone over what you wanted to keep the pod to. But I was away for work, and like, you have your mind and your gut, and they say that they're both like intrinsically linked, and they both have their uses and modes that happen, like for threat and harm and stuff. But I was away and I was in a supermarket, and in the next aisle, I've heard a kid who sounded, it was just like my son. And all in the space of a millisecond, my body, like my gut, had this like knots and butterflies, because I thought it was. But then my rational mind kicked in and was like, of course it's not. And there's nowhere near here. And then I settled down again. But it's like that gut love and bodily feeling and oxytocin just surged so quickly, thinking it was like my child, because I miss them so much. Like, when I'm away, I pine for them. I hate going. I really, if I have to go away, I try and reduce the time away from them as much as possible. I try and go like after bedtime or whatever else. And I can't even explain it. But just for anyone, like you said, those fears do go. I had them right even up through the pregnancy, and was really struggling to bond and do the whole, like, sing to them or talk to them and touch them when they're kicking. Then I spoke to friends after, mates who had biological children. They're like, oh, no, it's the same. Could be asked. I was like, oh, so yeah, that was because I had that. But then my mind started going, well, is that because they're not biologically related to you? No, it's just a bloke thing. And
Well, I don't know, and I don't know whether it's just a bloke thing either, because when our son was born, we didn't know at the time, but he had a milk allergy and he cried all the time. Now, I ended up with postnatal depression, which happens to a lot of people, and a lot of people who've been through fertility treatment. And the narrative that I was telling myself was the reason he was crying all the time was because he knew that I wasn't his biological mother, and that was why. Obviously, had nothing to do with it, and everything to do with the milk allergy, which later came out. But I remember those feelings and thinking X, Y, and Z. Then having come out of the other side of postnatal depression, that's absolutely not the way that I think now. And interestingly, right at the beginning of the podcast, you said, and I'm glad we haven't cut this short, because I think it's been a really, really interesting conversation, and I hope people listening have found it really useful. But I want to just touch on another couple of points, because I think they're important. And you said you wouldn't change now how your children came to be. And that is exactly what I say all the time, and my husband too. I wish for a less complicated story for them, but I don't wish it to be any different, because to do that, to me, would change who they are and who he is. And I wouldn't want to change who he is, because he is.
Or the fact that it's him. And because I've
That's
thought
what I
about
mean.
this,
Exactly.
if someone could wave a magic wand and say, right, you didn't have to go through any of that, you could just have kids easily, but then it wouldn't be these two children. It'd be like literally impossible. And I wouldn't do it. I would not trade them in for anything, anyone. And it's,
I wouldn't.
I think
Genuinely.
that's the thing that I try and tell to anyone. I wouldn't change anything. Like, of all that pain, all those years, that complete stripping of character, it was guiding me to every shortcut that we ever had, every delay that we ever had. It was delaying us because they weren't ready for us. We got there when we were supposed to get there, and it was always them.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. And then I also think to myself, had I not have been through that, had we not been through that, I'd have never set up the company that I run now and been able to help hundreds of people around the world who are also struggling. So, I think there's some comfort that is in that as well. And I agree, like our son is a child that we were meant to have. And so I would absolutely not change it, even though it was painful, difficult, awful things to go through. I genuinely wouldn't change it. So it's really nice and interesting to hear that that's sort of your thoughts as well. And, thank you for being so open, because I think it's hard to be open and vulnerable, and particularly maybe in, men's voices as well. There's not as many men's voices, and it's so important that men are heard in fertility conversations. And I suppose I'd like to kind of end really on talking about what you're doing now, because like me and like lots of people who've been through their own fertility struggles, when they come out the other side, they then are like, right, we want to help other people, which I know you're doing a lot of. So can you tell everybody sort of what you're doing now in the male fertility donor conception space, so that people know where they can come and find you if they are looking for some more support?
Thank you. Yeah, the same. I came through kind of towards the other side. We still hadn't even got pregnant yet, but I decided that I wanted to start sharing my story. And my wife thought I was mad, because at that point, this was before I'd even opened up to anyone. It still took me the best part of a year to do it. But I just had a day where I was like, do you know what? There is no one talking about this. There's no men talking about this. Someone needs to do something about this. And I think that I'm well suited to do it. And she just thought I was mad. I don't think she actually thought I was going to do it. And then the next 8 months was essentially, I was writing my posts, what became my initial few posts. But then I started trying, it's definitely fear and procrastination, but I was trying to think of all these really heartfelt handles for Instagram, like things of, I don't know, like something about fatherhood, and everything I came up with didn't feel right. And then I just thought of knackered knackers, and I thought, do you know what, that's it. That's the one.
I love it.
And like you said, I tackle it now with honesty, with vulnerability, but with humour as well, because that's my personality. And I just started doing it. I started sharing my story. And if there was one word that would summarize the messages I was getting, it would be finally. Finally, there's a bloke sharing. And it's just kind of taking on that title is taking on a world of its own, really. I had a chance meeting with Kieran at the fertility show a few years back. I say chance meeting, obviously it's a fertility related event, but we left at the same time, and we did that whole kind of blokey thing. We were walking towards the tube, and it was like, I recognised him, and he looked at me, and I was like, all right. And then we just kept in contact, and then we started a podcast, like you mentioned at the outset. And each time, I've always had it, whether it was on my own or then with Kieran, we had the same thing, this nagging feeling that there's more work to be done. It's like, me sharing, that's great. Him sharing, that's great. The podcast, that's great. But there's always this but. And it just always felt like men needed something else. Of course, I'm not saying that we've solved it, but what we then created with Nexus Fertility, because we have our Instagram followers, we had our podcast listeners, and I started a WhatsApp group, and guys were so open and honest in there. And so we had all these different areas. We need to amalgamate this. And the word, like our Nexus, is actually based on the Latin word nexus, which is a central place of convergence. So it's this place where men could come, and we talked at the outset about me turning to Dr. Google, but people are still doing that. People are going to Facebook groups with their semen analysis. People are going on Reddit threads, Google, YouTube, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. So it's a place that blokes can come for support. We have a WhatsApp group. At the time of recording, there's about 132 lads in there. It's growing all the time. We want it to be the place where men come from wherever they come from. We've got loads of Americans in there, Europeans, Australians. I did a support group last night, and an Australian joined just before he had to go off to work in the morning. It's just, it just shows it doesn't matter who you are. Like the podcast, for example, we've got, the bulk of our listeners are in the English-speaking countries, but we've got one listener in Guatemala, and I love him. I don't know who he is, but I love him because he's as important as the bulk in the US or the UK, because that's a guy in Guatemala who's getting that support and knowing he's not alone. Again, that misinformation is what we try and cut out as well with the experts we do webinars with, but mostly it's all about support. We do in-person meetups for guys, and any nonsense you hear about men don't share, it's just got to be the right environment, because they share openly every day on our WhatsApp group. They all support each other. And in person, men come and they open up. There's never any pressure to, but they do. And it's just, they have to be in the right environment with the right psychological safety and most importantly, knowing that everyone there gets it. And that is what's been lacking. Is what we do.
And I think it's amazing what you're doing. I also forgot actually that you started sharing while you were still in your journey. I was like, oh yeah, of course. Like not afterwards, when you're like real live time, which I think anyone doing that is so brave, because it's very raw when you're in it, to then open yourself up to share when you're struggling yourself is amazing.
Yeah, it was only a month or two before, but and to be quite frank, I know that some of that was for me, because I had then by that point told my inner circle of friends, my inner circle of family, that for me was safeguarding myself when the twins came along, about that. I knew that I was still going to be vulnerable for the resemblance comments or this, that, and the other. And I knew for me that was almost mopping up everyone else who I don't necessarily talk to all the time. But I knew I wanted to do it, but that was a good way of doing it and helping myself, because you don't get over this. It's always to be part of me. There's still things now that come up as challenges or triggers. So I wanted to, also, like you said, put that across whilst we were still in the midst of it. And not to mention that I was petrified throughout the whole pregnancy of the tragedies that can happen. And until they were here, I never felt fully at ease, really. And I was just like, I just want them now so I can feel that connection, because I just didn't feel it throughout the pregnancy.
Yeah, which I think happens to a lot of people. And it's interesting what you're saying about, I think it almost been quite cathartic for us doing, like, even me running Your IVF Abroad now. I'm through the other side. I'm sharing now from the scar and not the wound. But as you say, there are days this stuff does not leave you. It does become lighter. But actually doing the work that I've done has massively helped me feel like I've been able to take my infertility and use that for good. Massively helps me as well. But I still think anybody that can get up and share when they're in the midst of it, even if some of it is for self, which, fair play, I still think that's an amazing thing to do. And I know this has been a really long podcast episode, but I really honestly think that we've covered so many really important areas, Sean. And I think, the male voice is so underrepresented in this space. And I think it's all been super relevant. So I haven't wanted to wrap it up any quicker, because I'm just really hoping that for anybody listening to this out there, that this has been really, really helpful. And there's so many people, men and women, who feel unseen and unheard, particularly men, I think. So, if you're going through something similar, then please know that you're not alone, and that there is help and hope and support out there. And if anybody wants to come and find you, Sean, I'm going to pop some links in the show notes for people, but do you want to tell people, just remind people again of your Instagram handles for Nexus, and also your other one as well, your personal one, so they can come along and follow you over there, and then maybe find out a little bit more about some of these support groups and things.
Yeah, so at knackered_knackers is my kind of personal journey. At Nexus, that's XY Fertility, or nexusfertility.com, and you'll find they're all linked in, so you'll find me on any of those.
And Nexus, sorry, I keep calling you Nexus.
That's all right. Yeah.
And thanks for explaining it as well, because that name makes complete sense now. You've explained it. So yeah,
it was probably, with no marketing background, it was my most my best moment, maybe, or second best after Knackers. But I said, because we were going to go for Nexus because of the ears of what it meant, and then I said, let's just change the U for a Y. Then it's got XY for men, and it's like, yes,
I like it. But nothing's going to beat Knackers, Sean, I'm afraid.
No, that's it. I have to embrace that. It's funny though, it's completely non-translatable to America. They don't get it. So it kind of loses its impact when you have to explain it.
Oh, no.
They don't have the slang for either word.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. We don't know that when we set out, do we, to come up with these things? It's like my company's called Your IVF Abroad, but actually I help people with all sorts of things that are not IVF abroad. fertility related, but you just, you pick a name and we roll with it, don't you? So
Well, yeah, the important thing is that they find you and they get that support. So,
exactly.
yeah.
And I'll pop the links to Sean's Instagram and websites for Nexus as well in the show notes. So before we wrap up, last final question. What things do you want people, a man listening to this podcast predominantly, to take away from everything that we've talked about today? What's the message that you'd like to leave them with as a kind of final thought before we say goodbye?
I think it's quite simple, really, for blokes listening, is that you're not alone, first and foremost, and secondly, everything you're thinking and feeling, you're not. It's not unusual. We go through it. It's complex. You're losing a lot, and no matter what your journey is through infertility struggles. Kieran, for example, was subfertile, but he still went through everything that I did, and more so severely, actually, mentally. And so it doesn't matter. It's not a competition. It's not a race to the bottom of Azoospermia or low counts. We all get it. So just come and join the community and know that you're not alone, and everything you're thinking and feeling is very valid, very normal.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you so much to all of you listening to another episode of this week's podcast. And I will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
If you are facing more obstacles than options and want to learn more about how to overcome your fertility testing and treatment challenges in your home country so that you too can fast track to growing your family and on your terms, then check out my free training at yourivfabroad.co.uk/free masterclass. Don't forget to rate and subscribe so you don't miss an episode and so that I can reach and help more people. Thanks for listening.